What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There are moments when a political system accidentally shows its real face, not through an official speech, not through another patriotic TV segment, and not through some polished slogan, but through a loyal servant suddenly realizing that the machine he spent years defending does not actually care about him. And this is exactly why next development of the Ilya Remeslo story matters. We spoke about him previously, but now there are some new things. Because this is not just some random internet drama, not some on one pro-government figure emotionally falling apart in public, and definitely not just another scandal people laugh at for 2 days and then just move on. No. This is a rare look inside the Russian loyalist world, where people who believed they were protected by the regime are suddenly discovering they were never partners, never friends, never family, but just disposable tools. The closest comparison is the famous leaked conversation between Iosif Prigozhin and Farhad Ahmedov, because in both cases the real shock was not only what was said, but the feeling that they accidentally said out loud what many people inside the system already think privately. Remeslo's emotional runs caused such a reaction because they exposed a bigger mood. Even people who serve the system are getting tired, confused and scared. So today, we need to talk about what changed more than 4 years into the war, why internet shutdowns and Telegram pressure created such visible anger, why ordinary people can no longer hide from politics by ignoring the news, even though Russian people are notoriously apolitical, and finally, why the Russian regime may now be entering a dangerous state for any authoritarian system, the stage where even its loyalists begin to understand that loyalty does not buy safety. Let's talk about all of that in today's episode. Here's where most people go wrong, because they assume that if a country is involved in a massive war, every citizen must be living inside the same reality, watching the same updates, worrying about the same frontline maps, and feeling the very same pressure every single morning. But that is not how a huge society works. In Russia, millions of people managed to build a mental bunker around themselves to avoid these topics for years. Unless you lived close to Russia's southwestern border, where the war was harder to ignore from the very beginning, you could theoretically step away from political news and continue living inside your own private universe. You could watch, carrot planting tutorials, gardening videos, nail care videos, coffee machine reviews, TikToks, barbecue content, home renovation, debates, fantasy lore from Westeros, while barely knowing what was happening with Putin, Medvedev, Kherson, Kiev, Kupiansk and the Ministry of Defense. And for many people, this tactic even worked, still works. They could say, there's nothing I can do about the war anyway, so why should I ruin my nervous system by reading about Bucha, frontline disasters and political horrors every single day? So instead they focused on their apartments, businesses, hobbies, friends, families, and their 89th attempt to finally cook a decent Texas-style brisket. But here's the catch. You can ignore the news, but you cannot ignore the government controlling the country where you live. You can unsubscribe from political channels, but you cannot unsubscribe from taxes, bans, mobile internet shutdowns, broken payment terminals, platform restrictions, or pressure on students to sign military contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Just imagine you run a very tiny coffee shop with like 5 tables, somewhere far away from Moscow, maybe in a town where politics always felt distant, and your business is already struggling because the crisis reduced the number of customers and the amount they spend. It's not like that Russians were even notorious for going out anyways. Maybe your place makes like 7,000 rubles per day, less than $100 per day. And then the state arrives with some new rebranding requirement and basically says, congratulations, now you have to spend 50,000 rubles because your name Coffee to Go sign needs to be rewritten in Russian. You need to update Google Maps, reviews, everything. Nobody cares that you are not a rich entrepreneur, because nobody cares that your place has a tiny seating capacity, and definitely nobody cares that you now need to pay workers, designers, printers, installers, menu makers, suppliers, just to satisfy this pointless rule. Then your car terminal starts failing because mobile internet in the area is down, your local advertising options shrink because platforms are restricted, and Telegram, one of the very last functioning still kinda little bit spaces for business and communication, just begins to look like the very next target. That is the difference between the old stage and the new stage. Before, many people could say, politics does not affect me. Well, guess what? Now politics inevitably and finally walks into their stores, touches their bank accounts, breaks the internet, complicates work, and reminds them every single day that even if they move to places distant like, I don't know, Yakutsk, it feels like they couldn't survive almost anything. They still cannot escape decisions made by the central government. And once the state starts bothering people in their daily lives, we move from passive silence into something much more unstable, which brings us directly to the next chapter about the toxic relationship between Telegram and the Kremlin. Speaking about the Kremlin, Russia's Victory Day parade on the Red Square is just hours away. As always, I will be doing a live stream translating everything, answering your guys' questions, and just hanging out with you all. If you don't want to miss this unique annual experience, please make sure to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications. The parade starts at 10 AM Moscow time, 3 AM Eastern Standard Time, and midnight Pacific. The live stream will begin 5-10 minutes before that. And also don't forget about one bonus chapter which is exclusive for our Patreons. The link is down below. Thanks so much. Now let's continue. Now here is this detail that changes everything, because the fight over Telegram is not just about one messaging app. It is about communication, business, money, propaganda, influence, and the last remaining feeling that different groups in Russia still have some sort of space not fully controlled by the state. For ordinary people, Telegram is where they chat with relatives, read news, follow local communities, promote small businesses, talk to customers, and keep at least some sort of connection to reality when official television is becoming completely and increasingly useless. For bloggers, on the other hand, it is reach and income. But for the Z-aligned loyalist ecosystem, Telegram is something even bigger. It is their stage, donation box, career, and proof that they kind of matter. This is where pro-war bloggers, patriotic influencers, government-friendly commentators, and online attack dogs build their reputations. They collect money, promoted army-related projects, sold patriotic products, attacked enemies, fought rivals, and presented themselves as a necessary part of the war effort. They thought they were useful. They thought they were needed. They thought that the regime understood their value. But now they're discovering a very unpleasant for them truth. If the government wants to turn the internet into a controlled version of state television, it does not need hundreds of thousands of emotional Telegram personalities running around with their own audiences, scandals, money streams, personal ambitions, and God forbid their own opinions. It can reduce everything to a handful of approved channels, the RIA Novosti, for example, Intertas, Lenta, Slavjov Live, while the rest of the loyalist crowd just becomes unnecessary clutter. And that is terrifying for them, because these people spent years cheering when restrictions were aimed at liberals, when there were restrictions on independent journalists, opposition activists, and anti-war voices. They thought censorship was a weapon pointed outward. They thought pressure happened to the wrong people. They thought digital control would remove their competitors and make them stronger. But once the state builds the on and off switch, this switch does not politely ask whether you supported Putin yesterday. No, it just works. Some days it's on, sometimes it's off. If VK, Vkontakte headquarters, can push a tool based on keywords, if the FSB can, or regional authorities can demand restrictions, and if the online space becomes centralized, then why does the regime need some unpredictable Telegram fundraiser with opinions, donors, grudges, and a personal audience? That is precisely why even officially accepted propagandists can see the danger. Today, the freelance loyalists panic. Today, the freelance loyalists panic first. Tomorrow, it can be government contractors, presidential staff media networks, federal ministry-linked channels, FSB-friendly commentators, and governor-controlled Telegram operations. Every political actor in Russia has some media ecosystem around them. But if the Kremlin's new model requires fewer independent operators, then many of those people are not protected by loyalty. They are threatened by the centralization. And this is precisely why Remeslo is not just one person having just a public crisis. He represents an entire class of loyalists, suddenly realizing that the machine they served may be preparing to push them out of the existence next. Let's pause here quickly for a second, because there is something bigger and deeper going on, and it explains why Remeslo's reaction feels so intense. Some people do not support the regime only for money, access or career reasons. Some people build their entire identity around the idea that the government is powerful, wise, historical, mysterious and always somehow right, even when it changes its position so often that even a 5-year-old looks more consistent. I mean, just look at the regime's logic over the past few years. 4 years ago, they were aiming at Kiev. Then Kherson was declared a huge prize, only to be pushed aside later like some uncomfortable old poster. Now they fight for places like Kupiansk, as if the entire future of the planet depends on it. Donald Trump can even be treated as a potential friend one day and just this Anglo-Saxon deceiver and enemy the very next one. As you can see, goals change, enemies change, friends change, red lines change. Brown lines probably stay the same. But the loyalists must keep saying everything makes sense. This is where the belief becomes almost religious. The loyalist tells himself that the government may look contradictory only because ordinary people cannot understand its grand strategy. The state is supposedly 250 times smarter than you, so you surrender just your critical thinking, bow your head, repeat the approved line, attack whoever needs attacking, and just assume obedience will bring protection. And probably some money along the way. And that is the emotional contract. You serve power, and power protects you. Maybe it gives you a job, money, immunity, access, status, or at least a warm place near the system. You're not like those people outside the fence. You are. At least you think you are useful. You are loyal. You're one of theirs. But here is where they do not understand until it's too late. The Russian regime does not have friends in the human sense. It has simply instruments. A propagandist, a snitch, a patriotic commentator, or even a Z-aligned personality is useful only while the current task requires him. And once the task changes, the tool can be just thrown away without ceremony. This is why this story is so humiliating for the loyalist crowd. Just imagine spending 15 years serving the government, destroying your reputation, losing friends, becoming toxic to everyone outside the system, and then suddenly discovering that the system does not even remember your loyalty as loyalty. It doesn't even know your name. You thought you were building a career, and the regime just saw just a temporary and potentially sometimes even free labor. You thought you were becoming a powerful defender of the state, and the regime just saw a replaceable function. And what happens when this function expires? Where does a figure like Ilya Remeslo go? Back to civil law and arbitration after years as a public pro-government operator. Who would just even hire him? Does he go to TV Rain and host a legal program? I mean, that would even be absurd to everyone involved. This is why working for the regime can look like success at first and like a trap later. At first, it gives access, recognition, money, drama, and the illusion that you are part of something huge. But eventually, the machine changes its needs, and all your old loyalty becomes useless, while your ruined reputation stays with you forever. And this is the difference between ordinary people being pressured by the state and loyalists being abandoned by the state. A small business owner hit with tax changes, forced rebranding, and internet shutdowns is angry. Because the government became just a very expensive nuance, but something that they potentially can fix if they want to keep going. A loyalist, on the other hand, like Remeslo, is shaken because the government became proof that his entire life project was a simple lie. And after conquering the minds of most regular people, the state has nowhere else to go other than after its very own defenders. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. Now here is the game changer, because the Russian system has reached the stage where pressure is not only aimed outward at open opponents, or independent journalists, activists, or people who just reject the regime in general. It starts turning inward, towards people who thought were useful yesterday, but may become inconvenient today. That is why the Remeslo saga may not just end with Ilya Remeslo. The more important question is who promoted him, who invited him, and who funded him, who handled him, who placed him in useful networks, and who put him on shows and who used him as an instrument. So many people just connected to him, which can be as an avalanche effect later. In a system where agencies compete for money, influence and power, one scandal can become a perfect excuse for internal score settling. You can potentially even already imagine how this works. Someone asks, who trusted this person? Who gave him access? Then another person asks, who paid him? And suddenly the story is not only about one emotional loyalist anymore. It becomes a file. And in Russia, a file is never just a file. It is a weapon waiting for the right hand. This is especially dangerous because the system no longer needs the same complicated theater it needed before. In the pre-war period, pressure often required more performance, legal dramas, stage procedures, witnesses, evidence games, and public narratives. I mean, just think about the Navalny-related cases, thousands, if not hundreds of them. Not Navalny himself directly, but people who supported him and many others. The claims about insulting a Second World veteran, old-style elaborate political trials as part of that earlier era, all this. But today the machine is more direct. An online offense can be already enough. A post, a comment, a connection, or even the wrong interpretation of history, which is different from Putin's, all this can become a problem. So why does the regime still need a large ecosystem of professional loyalist performers if the system can function with a few decorations? That is the terrifying career problem for the loyalist class. Their old usefulness was built for a previous stage of the regime. They helped attack the opposition, create noise, push narratives, and make pressure feel socially supported. But once the system becomes more centralized and technologically controlled, many, if not all of those people become unnecessary eventually, or worse, even risky, because they have connections, histories, money trails, grudges, and audiences. This is why comparison to Prigozhin's destiny matters symbolically. The point is not that every story repeats exactly, but that the system has a very recognizable pattern. A person can serve loudly, aggressively, and effectively, and still be discarded when the calculation changes. Everyone around that person says, "This cannot happen to me. I mean, I'm smarter, more obedient, better connected, and more useful," but then look what happens. The machine does not simply care. And once the machine begins eating its own servants, people stop feeling like a team and start feeling like suspects. Every old connection becomes dangerous, every old payment becomes questionable, every old appearance on somebody else's TV show becomes an evidence, a trail, something that might just need explaining later or apologizing later in the future. This is exactly how a system that once seemed strong begins producing fear inside its own support base. Not because the opposition suddenly became powerful, but because the regime's own loyalists realize that service does not create protection, it only creates a record. And once everyone is suspect, there is a very few people left who you can trust, which is another problem for the regimes like Putin's, as a topic for discussion of our final chapter. So here is the real reason all this matters. A regime can survive criticism from enemies for a very long time, especially when those enemies are censored, exiled, jailed, or presented as foreign-backed traitors. But when frustration spreads into the groups that once considered themselves part of the regime's own ecosystem, the political temperature changes dramatically. The Remeslo story matters because it shows that anger is no longer limited to liberals, anti-war Russians, exiles, or people who always rejected the system. It is reaching now people who used the regime's language, defended its decisions, attacked its enemies, and believed obedience placed them on the safe side of the fence. Small businesses, yes, obviously are frustrated because of tax pressure, branding rules, internet failures, advertising restrictions, and just in general rising costs make daily survival harder. Students or families are worried because undergrads can be pressured towards Ministry of Defense contracts, the topics that we also discussed in our previous videos, while schools even push ideological messaging harder for preschoolers or elementary school kids. Online workers are frustrated because platforms become unstable, monetization gets harder, and Telegram pressure threatens one of the last functioning spaces. Even people in places like remote areas like Yakutsk, far from the main political stage, are still reached by taxes, bans, shutdowns, and state interference. But loyalists are facing something more humiliating than inconvenience. They are losing the myth of special status. They thought that the system had enemies and friends. They thought they were friends. But the system has current needs and expired tools. It can use a person for years, let him destroy his reputation, and then just simply walk away as if nothing happened. And the irony is almost too perfect. For years, these people helped justify pressure on others. They explained why restrictions were necessary, why independent voices had to be silenced, why the internet needed control, why the state needed strength, why criticism was betrayal, and why obedience was simply patriotic. But once control becomes the main principle, it does not stop at the opposition's door. It enters loyalist apartments too. This is the lesson the loyalists are learning the hard way. In this model, there is no permanent safety, only temporary usefulness. The person who claps today can be questioned tomorrow. The person who denounces enemies today can be denounced by a rival tomorrow. The person who simply says the state knows best and just does nothing today can wake up tomorrow and discover that the state has decided it knows best without him. That is once again why the Remeslo saga is not just personal. It is a symbol of a wider Russian moment. The war, taxes, bans, telegram pressure, mobile internet shutdowns, business problems, ideological pressure on students, and uncertainty inside the loyalist ecosystem all point in the very same direction. The regime is demanding more money, more silence, more obedience, more adaptation, and more sacrifice from everyone, including its own the most loyal servants. And when a system demands everything while guaranteeing nothing, even believers begin to crack. Guys, if this was an insightful episode, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget about the Victory Day Parade livestream happening pretty much tonight in a couple of hours, I guess, depending on when you're watching this video. Thanks so much for watching. Patreon link is down below. See you soon.